Good evening, friends, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to this special show, Gyan Charcha, the very first conversation in this series. I profusely thank Shobhit University to conceive this idea and make it possible today. My special thanks to the Honorable Chancellor, Kozhikode Vijendra, who is the brain behind this entire program. Friends, the times we all are going through and we wish to come out as soon as possible are unprecedented indeed. Maybe it doesn't happen for over a century. And it's made us see the relationship, each relationship, family members, between the colleagues, the society, every relationship, every process and function in organizations, every sector, including education, and almost everything, including ourselves, in a new light, in fact. Education, as I said, is no exception. It's a part of the impact. From immediate switching over to the online teaching mode in March 2020, this happened all over the world. We are not talking about the efficacy of the same. A spurt in companies, tech companies offering technology platforms claiming to be a panacea to all the issues involved in education, to no class, no fees kind of campaigns in institutions, as it has been, of course, in the schools as well. From online assessment to pedagogical and andragogical issues, so much is being discussed all around. While some of the things which are suggested, what will happen post-COVID seems very, very exciting. And everyone seems to be suggesting that COVID-19 provides a great opportunity to reform and also provides a perfect setting for restructuring higher education, including bringing in some of the changes which have not found favor among academicians for long, despite a lot of pressures of unemployability, a lot of criticism from world over, not being there in any ranking, as if it had to take COVID to strike and will wake up and change. If I not talk about COVID, otherwise also higher education has been struggling with many, many issues, like the role of online or virtual learning or electronic medium to be used, the debate on education versus skills. What we understand by skills, what should be the balance? Should skills come at the cost of education? Should it be integrated with this? There have been issues that why in higher education in India, we've not been able to attain the higher order learning outcomes. And the entire debate is also about what should be the real and feasible parameters of radical restructuring of higher education. We have spoken on all the platforms in last 3 to 4 months. The entire theory underlying the impact on education, as well as what will happen when we reopen the higher education sector. We have also been discussing somewhat wishful thinking. This will happen and that will happen. And we almost declared that COVID provides an opportunity also which is unprecedented. I was reading a very interesting quote which fascinates me. One of the greatest thinkers, Ariana Huffington, said that nothing should go back to normal because normal wasn't working. If you go back to the way things were, we will have lost the lesson. Maybe rise up and do something better. Now, these kind of thoughts are being echoed as if post this COVID, when we reopen, things would be absolutely fantastic. Now, having discussed so much, I think before we prepare ourselves to reopen, we need a reality check that how much of what is being talked about is going to really happen, how much of it is feasible, and how much of it will be real. To discuss these issues threadbare, as we deal with the topic radical restructuring of higher education, how real, how feasible, the topic of Gyan Charcha today, we have with us a legendary academician who needs no introduction. It's a special privilege and honor for me to be conversing with him on these important issues as we look at reopening the higher education post this pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, while I have been a personal admirer of Professor Vinayshil Gautam, today I take immense pleasure in welcoming him as the main speaker in this Gyan Charcha. I cannot think of a better person than Professor Gautam to discuss the issues at hand. We have been attending many webinars, and there are speakers after speakers, very learned speakers from India, from abroad. But somewhere I find that at the end of the webinars, the feeling which you are left with, that they have been reduced to just talks and nothing much on ground. I have known, as I said, Professor Gautam since 1998, to be more precise, even though I had heard about him much before. He has deep insights into the functioning of higher educational institutions and the issues involved therein. He is the one who can articulate the issues in a very lucid and straightforward manner, that it reaches the desired audience without any doubts. An internationally acclaimed management expert, Professor Gautam has facilitated management development activities across the world. To name a few, he has contributed towards management activities in Germany, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, and some of the finest organizations in India, of course. His expertise has been sought in some of the key policy formulation activities of the government as well as corporate sector. He has been on the board of various Indian and foreign organizations. So Gautam has addressed global audience from Montreal to Melbourne to Caracas to Tokyo. He has been a visiting faculty at universities such as Cambridge, Sussex, London, Brunel, UK, Dominican, Duke, Penn State. The list is very, very long, very impressive. Widely published and recipient of several fellowships and recognitions, Gautam has served as the founder director of Kozhikode, a leader in consulting team at IIM Shillong, first head of the management department at IIT Delhi, which was a landmark kind of step in the higher education in the country when IIT started its first ever management department away from the elite IIMs. The first honorary dean of KPMG Academy, senior managing director at Principal Economic Advisor, Protivity, member Private Limited. He has represented India, among others, in the activities of UNESCO and Asian Productivity Organization's Economic Conclave in Morocco. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Gautam is a man who has experience of working with the elite of the elitist and has been deeply involved in the IIM system, IITs, central and state universities, some of the renowned ones, including BHU and University of Jammu, to name a few, and some of the finest universities globally. We look forward to certain free and frank discussion with him today, and some concrete suggestions from him which are practical. I've always known him to give absolutely frank and practical suggestions, as he's known for. And when I think of Dr. Vinayshil Gautam, I'm reminded of these beautiful lines which say, "Come on the edge," he insisted. I said, "I will not, I'm afraid." "Come on the edge," he insisted again. I said, "I will not, I may fall." "Come on the edge," he insisted again. This time I came, he gently pushed me, and I could fly. Ladies and gentlemen, it is Professor Vinayshil Gautam who had this unique quality of pushing the boundaries, pulling everyone towards the edge. If we stretch ourselves outwards in higher education, there are people, there are leaders like him who are there to give us the gentle push, and we will be able to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of these radical changes which are thinking of. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, may I request the legendary Professor Vinayshil Gautam for his remarks on the topic today. I'll also request each one of you, if you have any questions, please keep sending them to me. I'll try to segregate them and will try to answer towards the end of the session today. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Professor Vinayshil Gautam. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Raj Singh. I will like to get to the point without further ado, because ever since this topic has been announced under the auspices of Gyan Charcha and the leadership of Kuwar Brijendraji, I have had a series of calls asking me what is meant by radical restructuring and how is it different from restructuring. I have had people asking me, how would you know what is real and what is feasible? And I'm grateful for these calls because they have helped me to focus on what is an oceanic spread, to address myself to issues which are bothering a cross section of people in India and some abroad. Because when you have constraints of time and space, it is best to be guided by audience preferences than by driven by what you think you need to say. Because it is one of my cardinal principles in life: you can say whatever you want. So long as you have somebody to hear it and understand it, it is well and good. But if there is nobody to hear it, you can say whatever you want, wherever you want. So I'll address myself to the first question which was asked is, how real is radical restructuring? And let me take a very modest position. The present tradition of education which goes around the world, of university systems and specialized professional institutions dealing with health, management, marine, aviation, you name it, is an incarnation of around 13th, 14th century of churning which went on in Europe, and that is where the university system as we know it today and with its cognate institutions was born. This is neither the place nor do we have the time to get into an evolutionary description of the different stages of the growth of the university system, but very quickly, let me mention that this would not be the first time it has been restructured, nor indeed it will be the last time. Very briefly, the university system began with what was then best termed as Universitas Literarum. Universities are there for the pursuit of literary interests. You go there to become a gentleman, you want to write well, you want to think well, you want to analyze well, and that's what universities are meant for. Gradually, when European powers became imperial powers, they realized that it was not enough to be literary in taste, but you needed skills, something which Raj Singh, you yourself pointed out very wisely. There is a difference between education and skills. Education is training of the mind. Skill is automotive in character, and it has a time span to it. Whereas in education, there are certain fundamentals. And I'm borrowing from our discussion on this, as you will recall.
Yeah.
So they then converted the university system to what could be called Universitas Magistrorum. Universities were meant to create a good systems of magistracy. And very soon they realized that it was not possible to run colonies in a magisterial mode. They had to be administered. So universities then become Universitas Administrorum. So it was Universitas Literarum, Universitas Magistrorum, Universitas Literarum had become Universitas Administratum. Restructuring had already taken place.
Right.
And when that went on, after you had the French Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution, and in between came the American Revolution and all the other revolutions, universities were once again redefined and it became Universitas Aluminorum. Universities are meant for the alumnus. So the present university system, as we know, it has already gone through 4 definite stages of restructuring, and the 5th one has become a system which is knocking at the horizons, and we do not know the shape of things to come. That's where we are now positioned, and that's what I'll be seeking to address.
Right.
It is that beautiful cusp era where you are phasing out what you have known and entering into an era which you don't know what it will be. And personally, I find it very exciting. And with all my decades, and my career begins in 1968, you can imagine how much of this I must have flowed through myself. And if I had the time, I would have shared with you how I learned from a desktop computer going back to 1983, and my cashier of my institute couldn't understand why I wanted a desktop. He said, there is a mainframe, now you want a desktop. And after the desktop was bought from my project grants, I went to him and that was a story which I don't have the time to narrate now. It had to be cleared personally by the deputy director of the institute. I went to him for the software and he really got very upset. He said, Dr. Gautam, हम जानते थे जिस दिन आपने कंप्यूटर खरीदा उसी दिन आप आकर के सॉफ्टवेयर खरीदने को कहिएगा. No, he was so wise. And that is the level of literacy from 1983 to 2020 on computers. So all this has been happening. The future we are trying to read, and this is what this talk is about.
Right.
So there is a global restructuring which is already taking on the university system. And of course, the Indian universities are a breed apart from their cousins everywhere else. I don't know how many of you will agree. Indian English is English which can be only understood by the Indians. For example, in India, when you go to congratulate somebody, you will say, "Jara sa hum unko thank you karke aate hain." Now, an Englishman will not understand what is thanking somebody when you mean to say congratulation. In south of England, when they say, do you have a phone? And you say, no, I don't have a phone, because having a phone, say 15 years ago, was like owning a Cadillac. The phone connection was such a rarity. They would say, what a shame. In India, you say, shame, shame. It is almost like they have caught you with your ganjis on. So even the word shame has different connotations. So it is my feeling that Indian English is only partially understood by American English-speaking people or the English-speaking people, because we speak a brand of English which is very uniquely Indian. So the university system in India is uniquely Indian. There are over 1,000 universities on all shapes and sizes, and for the want of time, I will not get into a typology. But one thing that is clear about the university system in India is that becoming the vice chancellor is a life dream. It is a very well prized designation. What happens after you join as a vice chancellor is a question which can be only answered by people who became vice chancellors, joined, and discovered what thrill there is in that kind of an experience, and I'll leave that undefined. Therefore, there is an aura around universities. It is a great source of patronization to governmental institutions, to family agencies, to corpuses, to various types of associations, to reach the top of a university system. And that, I think, is a good thing. At least they see universities as a place of respect. Where we run into trouble is, if you try to find an algorithm of what is happening to Indian universities, and I don't have time to get into maritime education, health education, management education, agricultural education, pharmacy education, all of which are silos in their own right. Therefore, I'll confine myself to general university stream run by the UGC. Like many things in India, we took our model from Britain in late 40s, early 50s, and even when Britain moved away, we are still sticking to that model, which means the Indian University Grants Commission is one of those rare institutions in the world where the same institution is simultaneously a regulatory institution and a funding institution. Now, this strange combination is unique to India, and I would not like to be judgmental about it. But I'll tell you what is there in public domain. For last 20 years, they have been trying to shake the UGC system, and whether it be the UPA or the NDA, the powers that be have threatened to reform UGC, abolish UGC, create new institutions of UGC. And as I talk to you today, UGC is firing on 4 cylinders, and all methods of doing whatever you want to the UGC are still waiting for its time. So it is that strong an institution. Now, I am not going to get into a critique of the University Grants Commission, but it is central to the understanding of the nature of the university system in India. As you were generous enough in pointing out, my exposure to a spectrum of educational institutions is really it is really Asamudra Kshitish, from the seas to the horizons. And yes, it has been a lifetime that I have spent looking at it. And one thing that is very clear is that all these institutions, if you look at it, and I will not make a comment because I know I'm known for one-liners which become quotable quotes, so I have to be very careful in what I say. But I will narrate to you 2 experiences which I don't think anybody will contradict. I have gone to some of the best institutions, and believe me, I have dealt with some of the mediocre ones also. I'm not being snobbish about it. I've also dealt with startup institutions and taken a legitimate pride in it. But that's another story. They were giving an alumnus award, and this was a part of one of the best known chains in India. And I was asked to chair the alumnus award of that year. So I asked for the list of awardees of the preceding 15, 17 years. And you will not believe it, or maybe you will if I say it. Out of the 17 awardees, 15 had migrated out of India and made their career in United States, UK, Germany, you name it. So I looked at it and went to the director and said, do we want to continue with this tradition? What are we telling our youngsters, that to become a distinguished alumni of this institute, you have to migrate and make your mark there? So the director's first reaction was of confusion. Then he recovered from the confusion and he said, Dr. Gautam, we have made you the chairman to answer these questions. And he got out of the noose I was trying to put around his neck. Yeah. What we did with it is another story. I don't want to get into that. Therefore, the model of excellence of Indian universities, you go abroad, make your mark, come back and be a VIP here. Now, with that kind of a system, to think of any excellence which arises from the soil is something I don't want to comment upon. And it's not because I'm speaking under the auspices of Shobhit University. There are institutions like Shobhit University which are rooted in the soil, and Shobhit is not the only one. So there is hope. So first restructuring is we have to create models of Indian excellence and not say your journal will be recognized as a good journal because your journal has been recognized in the listing of, and I won't name it. And this is a regulatory system of one of the regulators in this country. They will not recognize journals on their merit. They will say, are you recognized by so and so? And it's an American institution. Therefore, I've given you specific illustrations why excellence in our university system is slow to emerge. I won't say there is no excellence. The second thing is, and it bothers me deeply, that the entire higher education system, when it has an interface with the government, is hugely subsidized. The room rent is 10 rupees a month. The fees are subsidized, and it's like raising the tariff of bus fare. Every time you raise it, you make 10 to 15, there is an agitation. Recently, a central university in Delhi became famous once again because agitation against the student. But this very crowd takes loans, is funded by its parents, its uncles, cousins, sells of land to get an education in USA, England, and elsewhere, and pays 70 times as much. So the second submission which I'm tabling for consideration is there is no shortage for money. When people go abroad, they pay for their fees. They don't ask for fee waivers. They don't agitate when the fees is raised because they are very happy to say, I'm in University X, and for obvious reasons, I'm not going to name any university. I'm not here to rank any universities. Because the tragedy is, in the Indian pantheon, we have 4 or 5 names from American university. Oh, my son is in such university. And I won't name any such university, but we know the names we drop. The truth is, you go to America, that university may be third in 1 year and 14th in another year, but in India, it always remains at number one. So it becomes a part of a cocktail conversation. Now, I've given you a set of reasons why excellence is slow to emerge in the Indian environment, because the rootedness in the soil needs to be far deeper than it is now. And this is the first step in radical restructuring unless this fundamental change is brought about. And this will not happen on its own, COVID or no COVID. Let's be very clear. Every change in this country will not be COVID triggered. Now you look at the number of associations which deal with higher education. There is an association of principals of certain professions. There is an association of teachers of certain professions. There is an association of this, that, and the other. Even there is a society for technical education. I respect them all. I'm a member of so many of them myself. That not happy with that, industry associations have set up fora to deal with education because it's good publicity. It's good occasion to work. No comments there either. People jostle to get in there, not because they have any great ideas, by and large. Not this doesn't apply to, nothing applies to everyone in all cases, but it gives them prominence. It gives them a forum. It gives them visibility. It gives them an occasion to hobnob with the powers that be. Therefore, you get into these associations. I would like to know, and this conversation hopefully will not end today, how many of these associations have any vision of what the next stage of restructuring of Indian educational institutions should be about? And a conversation such as which we are in cannot be a monologue. I am tossing brain teasers, and I'll be happy to hear the reply, because this conversation will hopefully carry on for many more echoes than just today. I would also like to submit that the outcome of these universities, and you referred to it in your opening remarks, is something very interesting. Where do the products of these institutions go? And what do they flaunt? The salary structure was 9,038 lakhs. Now, clearly, I'm giving a mythical amount, but they are flaunting the amount of money the alumni got. That's not all. Our students have been recruited by multinationals, by private institutions, and the list never includes the reference public sector institutions. Let me stick my neck out, because as you rightly said, I have the capacity. You didn't use those words, but by implication, I have this rare capacity where the angels rush in, where the angels fear to tread. I have yet to see any educational institution in the IIT or the IIM chain which is known for supply side to public sector. That's not where our students go.
Right.
There's somewhere a mic which needs to be put on the mute. If Manish could kindly look into that. I would also like to refer to the kind of situation which is bound to be raised sooner or later, and their restructuring will become essential. No community of taxpayers is going to endlessly subsidize any sector without asking what is it in it for them. And this is going to happen to education also. I see the rumblings on the horizon, and that will call for a radical restructuring. And I have some suggestions to make on that. The university system or the higher educational system, which I see, will have an obligation to spend a certain percentage of their time looking into local issues. And there again, and I'm not embarrassed to pay a genuine compliment, universities like Shobhit will be out in front because they do address themselves to local issues. It can't be always serving to rephrase the idea of a famous professor in some prestigious university abroad, because that gets you trips abroad. I'm sorry, but the time such as we are in is running out. We cannot pussyfooting around situations which need to be directly confronted. Therefore, radical restructuring is now needed. How real is this? It will not happen till the powers that be is smile. This is a country where for even a slogan to be repeated, it must be mouthed by the powerful. When the powerful mouths a slogan, each one starts repeating it because there is a payoff expected out of it. Nothing wrong with that. But I would expect the professional bodies related to higher education to take a lead in this direction, and I don't see enough of it happening. They meet, they may have their annual conferences, nothing wrong with that either. But where is the blueprint from associations dealing with management, engineering, medicine to restructure? Indian Medical Council bill came up, and you know what happened in the press. Some of it went through, some of it didn't, and we can't be discussing individual bills. The will to change has to be internal to the system. There is this Indian Maritime University in Chennai, with which I have had some associations, and I expect the world out of it. Partly because it is dealing with skill formation in the maritime sector with global standards. It is also expected to look at research. It is also look at curriculum. Now that is a dream situation. The kind of model which will come up there may well be the model which can be replicated elsewhere. But that's another story. The point which I want to push for people's attention is that taxpayers' money will have to be paid attention to analyze what is radical restructuring. How real is this going to be? I think very soon there will be no choice. Because one thing which is quite obvious, when this pandemic passes, and that is where I will revert to the pandemic also, there will be such a universal shortage of money for funding purposes that to expect the government to keep doling out money will not work. I was teaching in the University of Sussex 1972. Those were the heady days of Maggie Thatcher. I had a joint affiliation with the Institute of Development Studies and School of African and Asian Studies, and it's necessary to make these references because we redid the performance appraisal system of Institute of Development Studies, because the British government practically cut off all funding for that institution, and we put aside 40% of the points of evaluation for the revenues that person was earning for the institute. Because if he didn't earn from the institute, he couldn't get his salary. Britain had this experience 40 years ago. I foresee a situation where the performance appraisal system in India will have to go a radical review, because the state governments or the central government or you name it, and I don't want to get into a war of this institution, that institution, the funding agencies are going to be extremely constricted. Therefore, there has to be a real restructuring. And finally, a few words of how feasible. Nothing is feasible and everything is feasible. It's like talking for change. When you want to change, you find all the reasons for change. And when you don't want change, you resist change in all its manifestations. Therefore, I would recommend the following. We should carry out a restructuring process keeping in mind the domains of knowledge, their structure, and the dynamics of learning. Now, this is too brief a time for an elaboration of the three concepts which I've just floated: domains of knowledge, its structure, and the dynamics of learning, which will be specific to the profession. And that profession should be able to answer these questions. So this is one specific suggestion which I'm making. My second specific suggestion is university system in India or institute system in the deemed to be universities domain will require radical restructuring in the sense that learning in India will have to be pluralistic. For example, I see no reason at all why Ranchi University should be conducting a curriculum of Ahmedabad University. And this is not a judgment of comparison. If the contextual element has up to 30 to 40% of weightage in the curriculum, I've had occasions to select various vice chancellors, including something in Arunachal Pradesh. I don't want to get into the details of it, but we selected a vice chancellor who had an understanding of what kind of research he would lead to have the benefits of education filtered down to all levels of Arunachal Pradesh. So the pluralistic character will mean that whether there is a UGC or not, there will have to be an institution which will set the standards. It will have to define the bottom line of research, the bottom line of curriculum, the bottom line of extension. And finally, I would say we should stop looking to regulatory institutions to tell us what to do. It should be an inside to outside flow, and that will be real restructuring. We should be able to decide for ourselves what is it that we want, but within an overall frame of standards which has to be nationally acceptable to create some sort of a parity. Now that's the burden really of another tale, some other day, some other time. But I did wish to respond briefly to the sort of posers which were put across to me, how radical restructuring in higher education can be both real and feasible. And I do hope, with my limited remarks, I have been able to convince some of you and others of you may like to think of how the path looks like and how we should walk across it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gautam. I think very, very insightful and very candid kind of statements as we would have expected from you. And you raised very pertinent issues when it comes to even think of implementing some of the things which I've suggested, like the criteria for excellence being just going abroad and coming back, how many marks and what grade you scored, whether it communicates something to the employers or not. The fee becomes a point of agitation, even if you think of increasing, rather even bring a thought of increasing, forget about implementing the change, whether it's the government universities or even the private universities. COVID has highlighted this issue that how this will happen as we go along when people want online education, but they don't treat it as an education. You also pointed out very important thing that how long we can keep on looking at the regulatory bodies. I think there are pockets of excellence in this country which have brought excellence in spite of or despite regulatory framework which we have, which boils down to the fact that it depends on the institution and the people in that institution, the thought leaders in that institution, who can bring the much desired change. We may or may not have the facilitating environment as such. You pointed out some of the areas where radical restructuring is required. So while there may not be time permitting us to discuss them in detail, but I'll take up a few of them if we can debate slightly more. One of the issues is that why we have not been able to achieve the outcomes as desired by the client organizations. Does it have to do something with the willingness of the teachers, or something to do with the structure of teaching learning plan that we don't meet these outcomes, or it is something lack of, I think, working closely with the industry and making education more application oriented? There could be, I'm sure, umpteen issues. And when we got down to debate, I had been part of one discussion where, I'm sorry, again, I'll name the university which is sponsored this organization. I know the genesis of this particular event. They've gone ahead with something called SEIZ, Skills, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Zone, which, if I have to summarize in one sentence, it tries to bring education to the intersection of research and practice, where the practice is focusing on local issues, where students are to think of those issues and find solutions using local resources, which also provides sustainability and I think fits well in the schema of national missions. Sir, what would you suggest as far as the teaching learning plan is concerned, or let's say the andragogy to be adopted is concerned, that we meet the desired outcomes from our educational programs? What two, three most important things you would suggest to us?
Well, first of all, Raj Singh ji, thank you so much for creating your own hierarchy of priorities on what we can cover within the limited time. And
Yes,
you have kicked off brilliantly in raising this issue, and let me try to respond to it.
right.
In responding to it, I would like to first clear the web and the cobweb of semantics. We use virtual education, distance education, online education, remote education almost interchangeably, and I could add more. They are not the same. Let's be very clear. The other day, I was talking to somebody who's known to be influential in one of the major ministries dealing with education, and I'm deliberately avoiding names. And he said they are envisaging 100 online universities. Brilliant. You already have got a radical restructuring because you have converted an intervening variable into the heart of the matter. Now, anyone who knows research knows that an intervening variable cannot become the heart of the matter. And if you are from the finance area, you will know a bank will never serve as the reserve bank. Bank is an intermediary institution. Online education is an intervening variable of a method. It has nothing to do with the content. Now, this business of eureka, because you are in a position to create eurekas and people will sing hallelujahs to you because you are powerful. I'm sorry, but that's the way the Indian psyche works, exceptions apart. Will have to be curbed to convert universities into a place where freedom of thought and a simple commitment to honesty of inquiry is the objective. Unless a simple pursuit of inquiry in all its forms is the objective of a university, unfettered by the consequence thereof, there cannot be any restructuring. Because और मैं जो कहने में कोई संकोच नहीं है, मैंने अपनी शिक्षा विदेश में शुरू की, मैं जब 6 साल का था, और जहां जरूरत पड़ती है, यकीन मानिए, मुंह टेढ़ी करके मैं भी आई कैन ऑल्सो स्पीक इंग्लिश इन देयर प्रॉपर एक्सेंट. बट द ट्रबल हाउएवर इज आई रियलाइज कि हिंदी के अलावा मैं कुछ कह नहीं पाता हूं. तो जरूरत इस बात की है कि बिना किसी हिचक के आदमी सत्य का लक्ष्य रख करके सत्य को पाने की कोशिश करे बिना हानि लाभ के. This autonomy of inquiry is the central building block of the university system. Therefore, the rest follows. You have to give universities a space to pursue inquiry in all its forms. The rest then follows. The trouble, however, is if the funding strings are attached to certain types of, whether they be private houses or governmental funding agencies, you have an obligation to toe their line. Therefore, we have to create enclaves of financial maneuvering for universities, and in that limited capacity, develop research institutions which will be then reflected in the syllabus and extension mode. I think your voice is getting lost, Dr. Raj Singh.
I think you mentioned about this funding and support for the research. In any case, for the private sector, this support is not forthcoming, is not even expected. So it is something to do with the self-financing kind of methods to be adopted. And then we can take it forward. Sir, in recent times, particularly when we switched over to the virtual learning or online learning or whatever the name could be given, I was reading a summary of about 20 countries who jumped to the so-called online education in last week of March or first week of April this year. And while there was not much of evidence of what kind of pedagogy was used, it boiled down to the fact that it has been mainly transmitting contents using a particular mode. Whether you simply transfer the PDF files or whatever the material you had, and there was almost no evidence of the pedagogical innovations required. And some would misunderstand that whether you are teaching face to face or through the virtual mode, uh, the pedagogy or the teaching methods or the andragogy, depending on the age group, will not really make a difference. I think that has led to the feeling that not much has been achieved in terms of online learning being a sustainable one, even though some part of this would always prevail, even if we become normal or we achieve the new normal. One thing which has come under critical scrutiny or even at times criticism, that when you adopt this mode, how do you assess the students? How do you conduct examinations? And some of the finest institutions have said no to this, as it is not doable. And some new age institutions have gone ahead and done it, in fact. Now, how effective they have been, that's a matter of something to be seen as more and more information will come up. It is also believed that when we change the method of teaching, that will be meaningless if we do not change our method of examinations, which is mostly compliance based and marks based and grading based. Once we are thinking of changing to more or higher degree of adoption of technology, in your view, what will be the change, which I believe should be radical, because we have even though tinkered with teaching methods, but we have not touched our examination system so far, which becomes a bottleneck in implementing all the changes we've been talking about. What kind of examination reforms, if I use the word, would you suggest for the institutions in times to come, sir?
Dr. Saab, you are probably more aware than many of us that your question runs at so many levels
Yeah.
that it would need much longer time than what we have here
Yes.
to address it at all the levels.
Yeah.
That is not my way of evading the question, because
Okay.
I don't think any question which is sincerely asked needs to be evaded. Even in the classroom, I was known to say, ask any question you want. The worst can be, I don't know the answer. I'll tell you,
Right.
I'll find out and come back and answer. What is there
Right.
to it? I'm not a
Right.
Brihaspati that I have the answers of all the known and unknown questions. So having
Right.
said that,
Right.
let me draw in my horns and submit that all these words are not interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
For example, virtual education or virtual learning was supposed to be beamed at non traditional students.
Okay.
That has now been forgotten. And virtual learning has been converted into a non classroom learning. That is not the meaning of virtual learning.
True. True.
So, to answer your question, I will focus only on the online method. Now, I have spent more than half of my life in IITs and IIMs, and the best of them, and at all levels of growth, from where even the umbilical cord was not cut to they had matured so well that they were spawning similar institutions elsewhere. And I noticed that continuity of evaluation is more important rather than the method, because you use a mix of all kinds of methods.
Right.
Now, no one method can answer every kind of learning issues.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the quinquennial review team of CMFRI,
Okay.
Central Institute of Fisheries Education. The reason why I'm talking of fisheries is because it's a field discipline. You can't teach marine fisheries issues in an online mode.
Okay.
He has to get out onto the field and understand it. Management is a field discipline. You can't teach management without placing him in a place of work where we call him as an intern. His management education is incomplete. You
Mm-hmm.
can't make a doctor online. He has to become a
True.
houseman somewhere. Now, this universality of online education is good only with reference to the topics which have to be covered. In some areas, online education will work.
Hmm.
It should work because it widens the reach, deepens the depth of the coverage. But maybe it's all my ignorance. I don't know of any professional body, and I'm not going to talk of Indian Philosophical
Hmm.
Association and Indian Sociological Association and Indian Historical Association, any professional body which has even taken up this theme.
Hmm.
And Dr. Saab, let me yet again spread my neck long. I have never seen so many webinars or conferences online as I have seen after 25th of March. If you look at the number of webinars which are being held every week, nothing wrong with that. I'm not
Hmm.
protesting. What I'm saying is, why doesn't somebody look at the content issues of education which can use technology, the sort of thing which you are talking about? I don't blame the government. I blame
Right.
ourselves, because ultimately, if a profession is not where it should be, it is because the professionals in that profession need to wake up a little more gingerly and apply themselves to tasks which are obviously running short of time.
Right. Right. I think camera has gone off. If you could look at it, sir, your choice.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. I think nice perspective. While I request the audience to shoot their questions on the live comments I've been receiving from Facebook and other mediums. So my question is, according to you, when we think of these radical changes, there are always drivers of change, and of course, we have seen many drivers of change in the past. Um, According to you, what will be a stronger driver for the radical changes we are thinking of? Will it be the striking of COVID and how long it lingers, depending on when we find the vaccine and when we try to reach the new normal, if not the old normal? Or it will be the technological changes, or we call them as Industry 4.0 changes, which will drive the changes more, according to you?
Dr. Saab, I'll go back to almost a proverbial statement.
Mhm.
You see, I have learnt my management through very unconventional means, through Hitopadesh, Panchtantra, Bhishma Parva, Niti Shastra, proverbs, folk tales, and the list is long, and I found it very
Mhm.
instructive. This
Right.
is the preface to what I'm going to say, and you have heard this statement before.
Yeah.
Nothing is more powerful than something whose time has come.
Mhm.
There is no idea so powerful as an idea whose time has come. We are
Right.
all affected by COVID. I have probably seen more of my domestic life in the
Mhm.
last 4 months that I have seen in the last 4 years. Not an act of choice, but it has been a process of rediscovery.
Right.
This is not the best place to get into it. Therefore, the significance of COVID is not lost upon me.
Right.
But COVID is not going to be the only trigger of a revolution on this planet. This planet has existed for millennia, centuries, and the known history of Homo sapiens on this planet is at least 500,000 years. If you get into study of physical anthropology, skeletons, and the evolutionary process, and I don't want to get into that. COVID may only benchmark the period, create that flashpoint where the subterranean forces will burst out onto the open. And what I see as the subterranean forces, the climate change which has taken place on this planet is far more fundamental than any other change which has taken place. The nature of soil has changed. And I will not talk of rain and water and all that, that's passe. So many things far more fundamental have changed. We are worried about COVID because we are worried about ourselves. We are worried about whether we may be infected by it this evening. And if so, what is the medical care which will come our way? Let's be blunt and let's face that. Now, it's a genuine worry. At least I'm covered by it. I don't know who else is covered by it, and I don't want to discuss it here. But whereas COVID may be a reality, there is a subterranean stream of far deeper changes. For example, the resource allocation of raw material is going to change. The era of oils is over. I have a serious place in the oil sector, and I can tell you the areas which are doing the best in the oil sector today are the areas of refinery, where the pent up demand is now so high that they are finding it difficult to meet the situation. But it is no secret that oil is slated to run out one day. So the nature of raw material is a far more fundamental change which will overtake this planet. The nature of the climate, and I could name you others. That is the one which will trigger the radical restructuring. COVID will have only propelled it, made it a personalized issue for all of us. It is not something like HIV, which happened to that person living in that colony somewhere else, and we have mixed emotions about it. But we are convinced no matter what we did, HIV would never happen to me. You can't say that about COVID. So the distinguishing feature about COVID is it has a universal socializing effect, but its role in triggering the change will only be a limited one.
Great perspective. In fact, I think I agree with you that COVID had just reminded us that, look, friends, there are a lot of changes which are required, which are pressing changes, but it has given more time for us to think. And as you rightly said, somewhere we are able to associate ourselves, each one of us, with the pandemic. And therefore, we are talking about a point which I think has been lingering in everyone's mind. Well, there are a few questions, and also it has been at the back of my mind. If I'm not, I think we can take one more questions with you, sir. About 4 5 minutes are left. So, summarizing few remarks by the audience and trying to put it across to you in my own words. One of the issues being discussed, which has also been highlighted in the new education policy, is of uh, interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity of education. We have been discussing for long the adoption of humanities and social science courses in higher education, as well as now in the school education. And sometimes I feel that school education has been far ahead of us than adopting these courses from humanities and social sciences. Also, I think this has been largely shaped by a culture which I called as coaching culture in a country, where after sixth or seventh class we hand over kids to physics, chemistry, maths, which may not be right. That's personal view of mine, but I think this obsession with physics, chemistry, maths has also shaped our minds and created a resistance in us uh, when it comes to accepting humanities and social science as the courses in higher education. What do you say? What could be done so that when we study physics, chemistry, maths, or commerce or economics with other subjects, and when we look at divergent courses together or divergent disciplines together, I believe it gives us a larger scope or larger learning opportunities, which we can measure to realize some of the outcomes we have never been able to reach at. What is your view on that, sir?
I'm grateful, sir, that you asked this question because without getting into too many details, towards the end of this month, I'm supposed to lead a discussion with some of the leading figures, both from medicine and in administration, on what are the areas of response to COVID which need attention beyond just the medical situation.
Right.
So, interdisciplinary requirements are progressively gaining more attention. Allow me to reformulate and take forward your proposition. It is not only that for understanding response to medicine, such as in case of COVID, we have to understand sociology, we have to understand psychology, we have to understand a host of other things. But each traditional discipline in its own right has also become multidisciplinary. For example, in engineering institutions, you have a department of civil engineering.
Mhm.
Now, a department of civil engineering is really a potpourri of at least a dozen disciplines itself. Tell me what is in common between deep sea mining and public hygiene, and both of them are taught in civil engineering.
Right.
So, disciplines themselves have become interdisciplinary in character.
True.
Therefore, this is a universality of education. Single disciplines need other disciplines. This is how I succeeded in convincing my colleagues in IIT Delhi, in the IIT system, that they needed management education
Mm-hmm.
to becoming better engineers from good engineers. I didn't want
True.
them to cease to be engineers. But I
True.
said, an engineer which so far has been a designer of systems will also become a person who will be putting that system to productive use. And that's where
Mm-hmm.
management education came in. That's how the management department was created. Therefore,
Right.
my first response to you is interdisciplinary approach is the flavor of the times.
Right.
My,
Right.
my second observation, and I'll use the window which you provided to me to make a submission. Models of university system will have to change. We will have to take universities to technical institutions,
Okay.
and campuses will have to be created. Say, for example, I visualize someday a university being set up in 370 acres of a public sector undertaking dealing with iron, heavy electricals, what have you, and I don't want to name any of them. Similarly, in the private sector, educational institutions, the campuses may have to move to places of work. Similarly, and we have had some excellent examples of this. Some of the places of work will have to move to the campuses. In IIT Delhi, IBM moved on to the campus with its research institution. And again, I'm trying to resist as much as I can specific references to institutions, because no matter what you do of praise or otherwise, there are 10 people who will see a meaning which was not in your mind. So I don't want to take that risk. All I'm saying is this is a two-way process. Campuses will have to consider an option, not as the only method, of also moving on to places of work. Places of work will have to open liaisons with academic institutions, because that flow would have to be continuous. Therefore, to sum up, interdisciplinarity is the character of the times. Single disciplines have become interdisciplinary. Interdisciplines, in their own term, need each other's domain. Similarly, the structure will have to be more holistic.
Very well put, sir. Very well put. I think there are many more questions. What we'll do, we will be trying to answer these questions online, because we are already exceeded by 2 minutes, sir, than the scheduled time. And thank you so much for giving deep insights on every issue we discussed today. I'm sure this will go a long way in thinking of when we get down to restructure our institutions, what kind of parameters we should be adopting when we restructure, rather than the shooting in the dark. Another thing, in conclusion, with your permission, I may say that the whole discussion points towards one thing, that online, virtual, and other things can be only a mode of delivery of contents or the knowledge or skills, whatever we call it,
Or
as compared to.
keeping in view the target.
Absolutely. Keeping in view the target, as compared to face-to-face teaching, which we all have been used to. But nothing will make us escape the changes which have been long pending. And if I may just say to my friends who are in the audience today, mainly from the teaching profession and the academic administration, it boils down to the fact that ultimately what happens in that classroom, in whatever mode, of course, that 1 hour or 2 hour or 3 hours, what the teacher and students do with each other interacting only matters. This is where all the innovations have to come in. Environment may facilitate, technology may facilitate, but I think the human mind has to be at work. As you said, that sometimes the corporate may have to come to the campus and vice versa. It's again a thought. How we deliver the desired outcomes to students, we may have different models. But I think ultimately what teacher does in the classroom, of course, facilitated by the environment and resources, and how we apply our thoughts or innovations, which we keep on discussing and bringing to achieve higher order learning outcomes, will only matter. And then, as you rightly said, the trigger of thought, as you rightly pointed out in the beginning, and that environment of inquiry which you have to create in the campuses will generate this much desired chain of changes which we are looking at in academic institutions if we have to deliver the value. Uh, in the beginning, you pointed out that we are willing to pay perhaps 70 times more money for a similar degree when I go abroad, and here I refuse to pay even 1% increase in the fees. I think we need to sit back and think of the cost benefit kind of or other economics of education which we have. What is that value which students and parents are looking at, which we are not able to deliver? And again, it brings me to the same point that we as facilitators, as teachers, as academic administrators, and educational entrepreneurs will have to think of that value which students are expecting from us. And then in that case, we will not be looking at funding coming from government agency or industry or subsidies in the education system. We will be more than willing to pay for what we get in education. I think that's the ideal thing which you have to ultimately go. Profits and revenue should not be hated word in academics, which we in fact hold back whenever it comes to talking about these things, that money is a hated word in education. But I think this COVID has highlighted this importance more than ever before, that how the financial sustainability of academic institutions has to be relooked at. The kind of investments we have made, were they in the right direction, or we have to redirect it? I think those are some of the questions which we will keep on debating as we go along. Thank you so very much, sir, for summarizing your huge experience in this short time of 45, 50 minutes. And personally, it has been a pleasure interacting with you, sir. As I said, my admiration for you has gone up, and I'm sure each and every person in the audience there will leave this webinar as much more enriched, much more learned as a person. Thank you so much for being there, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.